Hello, friends and listeners. Welcome to Truth, Lies, and Alibis, the true crime podcast from three friends sharing their perspectives from having years of 911 dispatching experience.
Episode 13.
America's First Serial Killer, Part 2.
In this week's episode, we conclude our discussions on HH Holmes and spend some time talking about the many speculations that surrounded his reign of terror. On May 1st, 1893, only a few miles from Holmes' mansion, the World's Columbian Exposition, also known as Chicago's World Fair, began. This is a pretty key event in the timeline for Holmes. Just some background for those of you that aren't familiar. Chicago's World Fair was the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in the New World. And I put that in quotes. It was new to him. It opened to the public on May 1st and continued until October 30th. More than 27 million people from all over the world came to explore the 690 acres of fairgrounds. It celebrated modern marvels such as the elevator, Cracker Jacks, the first voice recording, and the Ferris wheel. So it's the World's Fair, and it was literally blocks away from Holmes' mansion. Holmes took this opportunity to transform his third floor into a true hotel. He furnished the rooms using more credit scams and never intending to pay for any of the extravagance.
Because why would he?
He kept getting away with it. It's believed Holmes used the fair as a hunting ground. Women traveling and those far from home wouldn't be missed for months, and if they were reported missing, leads would end at the fair. Women would be brought back to the hotel, quote-unquote hotel, given rooms, and then most likely never leave those rooms again. By the end of the fair, creditors had closed in on Holmes, and his own funds were running low. He also started to have issues with Peitzel. Peitzel was asking for more money and had started drinking again. Holmes grew concerned because Peitzel knew of Holmes' nefarious schemes, and there was a chance he'd spill everything during a drunken rant.
See, this is my thought. If he's so smart, why did he trust, and just think about it. You're going to trust this guy who really has nothing to lose with your deepest, darkest secrets, and everyone knows when you drink, stuff just pours out.
Yeah, I don't think it was trust. I think Holmes 100% felt like he was a puppet for him.
Like easy manipulation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is kind of where nobody's entirely sure how many victims Holmes had. Most of what people say, it was anywhere between 20 to 200. Because if he did use the fairgrounds as a way to get victims, most of those women were either never reported missing, or even if they were, those reports never went anywhere. And those went, there would have been no, ledger to check to see if they checked into the hotel. They literally disappeared without a trace. However many victims Holmes had, it's very unclear of actually what that number is.
He lived in the perfect time, right, too, because I'm sure there wasn't really a system for reporting missing people back then, because people probably went missing all the time because you can't keep in touch like you do now. Or
look at how easy it was for him to just change his name.
Yeah.
Just to go somewhere and say, I'm so-and-so, and get married under that name. Now you have to prove that that's who you are, right?
Right.
So yeah, you're right. There's no DNA. There's no forensics. I don't even think back then policing was very different. It's nothing. There's nothing. So yeah, like Jess said, it's essentially they're gone.
They're
gone
just
without
gone.
a trace.
Yep.
yeah.
Stemming from all of this, Holmes began to make plans again. Holmes convinced Peitzel to work together on a life insurance scam. The proposed scam was for Peitzel to take out a policy on himself, naming his wife Kylee as the beneficiary. Holmes and Peitzel would then travel to work under aliases for a different scam. They would fake Peitzel's death with a cadaver Holmes promised he could provide. Kylee would claim the policy payout and then would give Holmes part of the claim. Peitzel would go into hiding in London, and his family would travel to meet him. Initially, obviously, Kylee didn't want to agree to the plan, but eventually gave in. Holmes and Peitzel traveled to Philadelphia, and on their way, they stopped in St. Louis, where, for the first time, Holmes was put behind bars.
For what?
He was caught trying to swindle a drugstore owner, and it sounds like it's kind of unclear, but it sounds like it came down to horse theft. Like he was trying to scam this guy out of horses.
Hey, that's a big deal back then. Horse thieves. You go jail. Go jail for stealing horses.
Yeah. So while Holmes was in jail, he met a notorious known gangster at the time named Marion Hedgepeth. For reasons unknown, Holmes ends up telling Hedgepeth about the insurance life scam he had planned and offers to give Hedgepeth a cut of the claim if he could provide the name of a crooked attorney that would help.
Interesting.
Hedgepeth provided the name of an attorney he knew that worked with their crime syndicate, and that was in exchange for a $500 payout. Holmes was in jail until his wife Georgiana bailed him out some months later. He, of course, lied about what he was doing there.
Wait, what year is this?
This was 1894.
Okay, so in 1894, $500 in 1894 is worth...
And the life insurance payout was supposed to be for $10,000.
Okay, let's see how much...
Dang.
Let's see how much $500 was. About $15,885 was the payout for the $500 was what he was going to get, his cut.
Mm-hmm.
So you said it was $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
It's always the life insurance policies. Don't ever get one. So $10,000 in today's money is $336,173.26. Which is, I mean, it's a lot of money, but...
Yeah. After Georgiana bails him out, Holmes resumes work on the original life insurance scam.
She should have left him there.
Well, poor thing didn't know anything about it. She met with Peitzel, who had been waiting for him in Philadelphia. Peitzel and Holmes started charading as patent dealers, and this was kind of their idea to kind of set up why they were there, was they were patent dealers that had these regular meetings that were meeting with inventors. After a month of being in Philadelphia, a local inventor arrived for a meeting. In the office, he found a dead man burnt beyond recognition. The body would later be discovered and identified as Peitzel, and it was set up to look as a laboratory experiment gone wrong, and it was supposed to have been a chemical explosion.
Okay.
The coroner would discover a large amount of chloroform in the dead man's stomach. Authorities were confused, trying to decide if it was suicide or accidental. If it was a suicide, how did the chemical fire start? The scene was unclear, and it was not your run-of-the-mill suicide. It left a lot of things unanswered, but eventually, it sounds like eventually it was ruled as accidental because...
Wow.
Well, we'll get there. By the time that the body was discovered, Holmes had already returned to Chicago, and then that's when Carrie, Peitzel's wife, was contacted by the police, and they informed her they needed to send a family member to ID the body. Carrie, as the sole provider, could not leave her kids to travel to Philadelphia. Holmes, reassuring Carrie that Peitzel was fine and had gone into hiding, convinced Carrie to send Alice, which was their second oldest daughter.
Oh, no.
She was 15 years old. She would go with Holmes back to Philadelphia to ID the body.
This sounds like a bad idea.
Yeah.
Once there, Alice had ID'd the body as her father. The case was closed, and Carrie was awarded the insurance money. They didn't get the full payout. They got, I believe, $7,500, so $7,500 of the $10,000 that they thought they were going to get. Holmes then reported to Carrie that Peitzel had owed him like $5,000 already, so she gave Holmes, of the $7,000 they got from the life insurance, gave him $5,000 of it.
Okay.
What a swindler.
After this is taken care of, Holmes returns to Chicago, but he returns without Alice. He set her up in a hotel room in Indianapolis, telling her he was going to retrieve the rest of the family. Carrie was obviously upset that Alice was not there, but Holmes calmed her by telling her that Alice was with Peitzel. Holmes told Carrie the scam was still being investigated, and they needed to be careful. If Carrie traveled with all of the kids, it would look suspicious.
No.
And so he convinced Carrie to provide more money and let him travel with 2 more of her children, Nellie and Howard.
He's just murdering them, right?
Don't jump ahead in my story.
Okay. I feel like this is all a bad idea.
So from there, after Holmes left Chicago with Nellie and Howard, Holmes led Carrie on a wild ride, communicating through letters, updating her on the location of her children. What he would do is he would tell her a city to go to, and he would meet her there, but Carrie never saw her other 3 children again. The ultimate downfall of Holmes came from a quote-unquote forgotten promise. Marion Hedgepeth saw news of Peitzel's death, but after waiting and never receiving his promised money, Hedgepeth informed the warden of the prison he was at about Holmes' scam. The warden contacted the insurance company, and that insurance company hired the famous Pinkerton's detective agency. And if you've been with us for a while, you'll recognize that name. And we checked in on it.
Since the beginning.
And Pinkerton Detective Agency does, in fact, turn into the Pinkerton Security Agency that the security guard tried to murder that lady.
That security company that never
Full
sleeps.
circle.
Yes. And that's actually, when I was looking into this, I was like, hey, when you were doing that research for that, did it mention anything about a detective agency? Because it said the documentary I was watching mentioned the never sleeps. And I was like, this is too coincidental. And we all know that I don't believe in coincidences. Sure as hell. Same company. Had a different reputation back here.
Yeah, they caught HH Holmes.
They were actually a very renowned, known, successful detective agency. They were, among their successes, they were known for stopping an early assassination attempt on President Abraham Lincoln, and they were also responsible for finding many Southern Confederate spies in the North.
Huh.
So, on November 17th, 1894, the Pinkertons caught up and found Holmes in Boston. He was arrested and brought back to Philadelphia. It's kind of unclear. From what I've seen, he was originally arrested on charges to defraud the insurance company, which he first claimed he was innocent, and then he pled guilty. So it was originally for that, to defraud the life insurance company, and then it came out there was obviously more investigation done on Peitzel's body, and the added charges of murder for Benjamin Peitzel was added. While awaiting his trial, he was transferred to Moya Mincing Prison. Holmes was insistent that Peitzel had committed suicide, but due to the circumstances, the case needed further investigations, and authorities were no longer willing to believe any of his pleas. At this time, it became knowledge that no one knew the location of 3 of the Peitzel's children that were supposed to be traveling with Holmes. Holmes insisted they were safe, but agencies all over many states had no luck finding them. So what he would do was he would say, oh, well, they're here, and then that local agency would go try to find them, and they'd never be able to find these children. Finally, a noted detective, Frank Geyer, was hired to trace Holmes' steps since he very first left Chicago with Alice. Geyer had help following the path across the states from numerous letters that Alice had wrote to her family. Though Holmes never mailed or delivered any letters, he kept them. Alice often wrote of her travels with Holmes, talking about where they were staying in the city, how long they were there. She also talks about missing her family. There's an excerpt in one of the documentaries, and it's just very heartbreaking. She's definitely I've written to you multiple times. How come I haven't heard from you back? She fully believed that Holmes was delivering these letters.
Can you imagine being a detective back then?
Ugh.
Could you just imagine how hard it would be?
Mm-hmm.
It's something to think about.
Yeah, there's a lot more legwork of actually going.
And it takes so long back then, probably, on your horse.
But also just I don't know how many unsolved cases there must have been. You couldn't honestly solve all of the stuff that probably, even the stuff that was reported. So
yeah. So during the time that Geyer was following these steps and going across these states, kind of going through Holmes's travel history, Holmes did admit to killing all 3 of the children. However, as soon as Holmes was arrested and there was speculation that he was involved in Peitzel's death, he kind of became... I want to say he became, obviously he was already unpredictable, but he kept to, he was a firm believer in himself, right? As soon as he was arrested and brought up that he may be responsible or involved with Peitzel, he kind of just became super unpredictable. So he would admit to things and then immediately after reclaim those. He was all over the map as far as like what crimes he had committed, or, yeah, I did that. Just kidding. No, I didn't.
So he would like redact his confessions and stuff.
Yeah, and he bounced all over the place. During this time, he admitted he said that he had killed these children, but given the circumstances, they weren't really sure if they could believe that or not. That if these kids were really still out there, he just had them like, some believed that they might have been in Canada or he had taken them over to London. So because of the inconsistencies, Geyer was determined to follow through and find these children. He used bits and pieces of Holmes' confession to travel to a home in Toronto. Holmes had said in this home was where he had killed both Alice and Nellie. Holmes' confession seemed to be rooted in truth. The bodies of 2 young girls were found buried in a chest in the basement.
No.
And Holmes has said what he did was he locked the girls in the chest and then siphoned gas into the chest so they asphyxiated to death.
Oh my gosh.
How old were they?
Alice was 14 and Nellie was 12.
God.
So after finding Alice and Nellie's bodies, Detective Geyer traveled to Indianapolis to follow up on Holmes's claim of having killed Howard Peitzel there, and Howard Peitzel was 10 years old. In the house that Holmes had rented, Geyer found Howard's teeth and bits of bone in a wood stove, confirming Holmes' claim that he had drugged young Howard, dismembered him, and then burnt his body in the wood stove.
Jesus.
I just, like, why? I mean, obviously probably to get away with his scam, but it's still just like,
But like the kids didn't know.
no, and he could have just sent them on she already gave him more than half of the money.
So a lot of it, they say that he was like tying up loose ends because to Carrie and to his family, Peitzel was supposed to be still alive and he was eventually supposed to deliver all of them and reunite them. So he couldn't just not do that. So he had to eventually, his plan was probably to eventually get rid of all of the Peitzels.
Yeah.
He probably from the beginning, because my thought is he knew he was probably going to get rid of them all, because otherwise he could have just set up this thing to look like an accident without involving everyone else.
So during this time that Holmes is in jail, on July 19th of 1895, Chicago police received permission to search Holmes's so-called castle. This is where it gets weird and things are kind of
wait a minute. This has already been weird.
Well, no, I say that because, so the Chicago police go to search this mansion, but there's no real evidence was found on the topmost floor and the confusing second floor. So it's kind of unclear as to, like, what that second floor looked like, if that was supposed to be the rooms that Holmes siphoned gas into, and that's supposed to be where the vault was in which those girls had been locked in and suffocated.
Yeah.
We'll circle back around to all this as well. Things changed, however, when the police made access to Holmes' basement. They found evidence of Holmes' sick obsession, including a pile of bones, bloody clothing, and the wooden dissection table with dried blood on it. The media soon caught word of the horrors and dubbed the structure the Murder Hotel. This also led Chicago police to be bombarded with reports of missing persons from the last few years. So, and this kind of doubles back to what we were talking about earlier, is even if you are reported missing, especially with the lack of evidence there, even if Holmes was involved, they would never really find out, even if you were reported missing. All this seemed to do was to further blur the lines between real crimes and fake ones that Holmes had committed. Holmes, of course, loved the attention. It was coming from all over the country, and he was even gathering international news. He began confessing to every crime that reached his ears. Police would investigate his claims only to find supposed victims still alive and well. During his time in Moyamensing prison, Holmes did what no other serial killer had done. He wrote his own autobiography.
He is a narcissist.
Yes. The pages were littered with Holmes's claim of horrific crimes and only added to the sensational spectacle Holmes had created around himself. Pages held confessions that police would be able to confirm never occurred. He also states in there, you can still find the autobiographies like in his own words or something like that. He talks about being possessed and he's like the devil, and it was like he knew. I think what I took away from it is like he knew that people already thought he was evil, so he was playing into it.
No one lies like Holmes. No one kills like Holmes.
At this time, also, a newspaper, Hearst newspaper, paid Holmes for a confession, which most of which turned out to be fiction.
Yes. Oh, look, another scam I can make money on.
Exactly.
Yeah. Back in Chicago, apparently the basement of the murder hotel was littered with remains of crimes, but there was nothing specific enough to add any charges. So though there may have been evidence that this was not normal, there was nothing clear enough.
Gosh, that sucks.
On October 28th of 1895, Henry Howard Holmes went to trial for the murder of Benjamin Pitezel. Holmes used the attention to raise even more dramatics. The first day of his trial, he dismissed his counsel and represented himself. Like we said.
In true narcissistic form.
True narcissist. Except this only lasted a few days. Since the prosecution was providing plenty of evidence that Pitezel could not have committed suicide, Holmes rehired his counsel, however, later claiming his rehired attorneys were the reason he lost his case. And this was one of the, we'll link our resources on the website, but one of the documentaries was really great because it had this psychologist on there and he was talking about, like, this is what narcissists do. Like, he got rid of his counsel so he could be the grand master. And as soon as things started to go against his way, he brought them back as his scapegoat. So he could say, no, it's not my fault I lost. They're bad at their job.
Yep, it's always everyone else's fault.
Of course it's never their fault. Yeah.
I wonder if he's related to Ted Bundy in any way.
I don't know. Holmes never took the stand for his trial. However, both his recent wife, Georgiana Yoke, who still knew Holmes under his alias as Howard. Up until this time, she never knew his, I don't know. So Georgiana Yoke and Pitezel's wife, Carrie, testified against him. During this trial, Alice's letters were read to the court, and reportedly the most memorable moment was when Carrie Pitezel broke down, hearing her daughter's words of worry, loneliness, and mistreatment. She wrote often of how she missed her family and why they had not written back to her. On May 7th, 1896, HH Holmes was found guilty of Pitezel's murder and was sentenced to death by hanging. Because of what evidence was like back then in the 1890s, even though Holmes confessed to these crimes, especially the Pitezel children, because those were the ones that they had bodies for, he was only ever charged for Benjamin Pitezel's murder.
How's that possible when wasn't he the one who, it was just his teeth and like bones, right?
No, so Benjamin's the father.
Okay. Sorry.
Howard was the 10-year-old that he had burned.
Okay.
Holmes' last statement was one of innocence. Holmes recanted every confession he ever made, claiming they had all been lies. He also had a strange request before his death. He wanted to be buried in a block of cement 10 feet under the ground. This was because Holmes thought doctors would want to examine him and his brain to try and find out why he was the way he was, and he worried of grave robbers. So it seemed he didn't wish the fate for himself that most of his victims underwent. Well, he was afraid of being dissected. He was afraid of being dug up and being examined.
Which is weird. Why wouldn't, like you just said, the very things that he did to other people, right? Like, he doesn't want to be dissected. He doesn't want to be looked at. He doesn't want to be cremated. Because why wouldn't you want to be, if you didn't want that, then why wouldn't you just want your body to be gone? What makes you think that somebody's not going to dig 10 feet? They dug 6 feet. What's,
Maybe that's, I don't know, because you said he was scared. Then they shoved him in there with that skeleton. Then he started to do all these weird, creepy things, right? Maybe that was his ultimate fear, and maybe he thought he had a lot of power in enacting this fear on other people.
Yeah, well, it's kind of that, like, master of death doesn't have to fear death.
Yeah, he wanted to be like God.
He controlled the death so it had no power over him. Mm-hmm. But then that power was taken away from him, and that was his ultimate fear, is he didn't want to be dissected. He didn't want to be taken apart. He didn't want people looking at his brain.
Me either. That's why I want to be cremated. But not in his crematorium.
That gave me the chills. Ugh.
Holmes did not meet a quick end. Upon hanging, his neck did not break. and it said that Holmes slowly strangled to death and was pronounced deceased 20 minutes after the gallows had sprung open.
Good.
Which, again, is a lot of his victims were asphyxiated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So was he?
Yeah, you got to feel what your victims felt. So.
Yes. Holmes was buried in an unmarked grave in a cemetery in Yeadon, it's pronounced, Pennsylvania. However, due to rumors of escape and subterfuge, Holmes's body was exhumed in 2017.
Whoa.
In 2017, they exhumed his body, and the concrete ended up preserving his body and his clothing, even his mustache.
No
his mustache.
way.
His body, so they went against dental records and they tested to confirm it was him. He didn't pull some Houdini and escape, and it wasn't some different body. I tried to find out where the speculation and rumors came from, and I couldn't really find it anywhere. It's just like a sentence that like, oh, there was rumors and they decided to dig him back up and verify that it was him. After he was positively identified, he was reburied at the same location. So it's kind of his last request.
Was denied.
Well, it wasn't denied. They buried him under 10 feet in his block of cement, but what that ended up doing was preserving him.
So that science could look at him.
Yeah.
His worst fear.
They should have looked at him like decades and decades and decades later.
Yeah, I was shocked. I hadn't heard anything about that in 2017, so I was reading it and I was like, oh, I probably could have found more, but I didn't. So back in 1896, in the neighborhood of Inglewood, citizens were divided as to what should be done with the murder hotel. A wealthy businessman had purchased the building with the idea of turning it into a museum. Locals were not thrilled. They no longer wanted Holmes tarnishing their homes with his evil. Before renovations could take place, there was a fire that was started by 2 local men. Though the building survived, it was essentially gutted. There was so much damage done to the inside of it that plans for the museum was abandoned, and the building was eventually torn down, and the site now is a branch of the United States Postal Service.
Oh, that's probably very
That's
haunted.
spooky. I was gonna say.
Okay, so that's kind of our timeline, and it's crazy and it's all over the place and there's a lot of unknowns. Because of that, because of the rumors and discrepancies, I want to take a moment and kind of go over a few bullet points of the biggest discrepancies and the biggest kind of, I won't say arguments, but like within the realm of like Holmes documentaries and Holmes books, the biggest things that at this point people don't know if they're speculation or real. So the first one is the Holtons. So Everett and Clara Holton, which owned E.S. Holton Drugstore, which was the pharmacy he worked in when he moved to Chicago before he bought the lot across the way. There was rumor that they both died. There was rumor that Mr. Holton passed away from cancer. There was rumor that he died of mysterious circumstances. Then I came across a statement that they were very much both still alive when Holmes purchased the store, and they were in their early 20s when he bought it, and they lived down the street and were still in the neighborhood when Holmes was arrested. And there's really no way to kind of like figure that out because you can look up one reputable source says one thing, one reputable source says another. The other one is Wade Warner's death, which was the furnace engineer that was hired and was supposedly cremated. It's uncertainty because there was no remains, that people don't really know. This was another one that kind of came from Holmes. They're kind of unsure of what
actually
could have
happened. Lied about it.
Yeah.
There's a chance.
Yes.
It's kind of smart if you think about it, if he lies, because then you never know when he's lying, when he's telling the truth. Like,
so, if you say, well, I murdered so-and-so and this other person, and one of them is still alive, it kind of
like,
clouds up
should we
both.
believe him? Like, it makes you double guess everything he says.
Well, yeah.
Yep.
Like you said earlier, like he was a very smart man. Like he's discrediting himself, so nobody can really pinpoint the truth. Nobody can, and again, we go back to it being back then, like there's no forensics. The investigating skills back then are so different than they are now. Like they don't have technology. They don't have like scene preservations. I think I read this book. I'll have to find it. But back then, that was around the time frame where murders would happen in like London or in the United States, and they would allow people to tour the scene, and they could take mementos, and they would print these pamphlets that people would pay a penny for, and then they would read it, and it would be like, this murder happened, tour the murder scene. And people, like, they would leave the bodies there for some time. Like, people could, it was like a Sunday afternoon, like, oh, let's go tour this murder scene.
They would leave the bodies, and then people talk about how our obsession with true crime is so new and everything. No, it's been happening for a long time.
But yeah, they would those were like, I'm pretty sure those were the names of like clippings, or these tiny little pamphlets they would have go out about oddities and murders and all this, like these crime scenes that would happen, and people could go through and look at the crime scene, and they could take mementos, and they can walk through the crime scene. So there's no crime scene preservation. There's no, like, you're not looking for clues. You're just saying, like, this person, we can make money off of this. So I don't know. It's just a weird time.
Also, so some of the biggest speculation is around the hotel itself. There are many people that believe that the stories of the torture devices and the evidence found in the basement were fabrications of newspapers at the time that were feeding on that speculation that, you know, wanted to make more money. The fact that at the end of the day, Chicago police didn't find enough to be able to charge him with anything because there wasn't much down there, which kind of falls in line with what we know of Holmes and how intelligent he was. He may have had the furnace set up, or he may have had a table down there or set up whatever, but it wasn't going to be enough that a crime could be pinned on him. And a lot of the hidden rooms and staircases that were said to be in the second floor most likely were there to house the stolen property and the furniture that he had bought on credit that he was hiding until he could finish that scam.
So they think that he just made it hard to get out of because he didn't want people to know about his scams?
Nobody really knows, right? Because we have an actual short list of true victims, but it's just very hard to figure out what the actual truth was, because not only was there a spectacle at the time where like the Chicago newspapers and things like that were blowing this out of proportion to make it bigger than it was, but then on top of that you add decades of time for those stories to grow. Two more things. The missing little boy, before Holmes got to Chicago, the missing little boy and the young man that died from the pharmacy medication, there's no real evidence to suggest that Holmes was involved in those either. So circumstances are suspicious. He was never charged for any of that because...
well, he disappeared.
Yeah, they were just gone.
I wonder, did they think that he was involved before he disappeared? Or did they think he was involved later when all of this came out?
It sounds, because at that point, especially for that little boy that went missing, he was still known as Mudgett.
Okay.
And that was before he even got to Chicago. And it sounds like that was wrapped up in things that, you know, before he had this mansion and all that. So it was, he was kind of ran away from that because of this circumstances that had happened to him there.
Okay.
There were also numerous rumors that HH Holmes and the notorious Jack the Ripper were one and the same, but that's been kind of pushed aside and nobody...
That's where I've heard this story, when I was doing research for Jack the Ripper. Yeah.
However, at the end of the day, whatever was exaggerated over time, we do know for sure that Holmes was a con man with a love for money. He was a fabulous manipulator and charmer, and we do know he was a cold-hearted murderer with no remorse, empathy, or care for those around him. We have, from what I've found, there are 9 named victims that Holmes is known to be responsible for. That number of 20 to 200, however that is, the ones that we know he was responsible for were Julia Connor and her daughter Pearl, Emmeline Segran, Minnie Williams and Anna, so those sisters, Benjamin Peitzel, Alice Peitzel, Nellie Peitzel, and Howard Peitzel. And that's the complicated, long story of H.H. Holmes.
I just think it's so sad that those kids had to be murdered. He just was a horrible, awful human. Those wives that got away with those kids were lucky, because it sounds like he didn't really marry the rest of his mistresses for love. He married them to do weird shit and make money, so.
Mm-hmm. He's coined America's first serial killer for a reason, you know? you know, even if there was ones before him, he was kind of the first to go down in that notoriety.
Thank you for listening. Additional information for each case can be found on our website, truthliesandalibis.buzzsprout.com. New episodes will be uploaded every Monday. Find us on Facebook and Instagram at Truth Lies and Alibis.